welcome everybody to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom for our Perceptive podcast series. I am Josh Blaser, and join me tonight, he is a modder turned developer who worked on the expansion to Titan Quest, Eternal Embers. And he's on to talk about kind of making that growth into the space, as well as what he is currently working on. So please welcome from Unearthed Studios, Charles Cunningham. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Josh. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. I've been wanting to do this for a while. And it's just great to talk to you. And really keen to chat about Titan Quest and it's a sort of journey,
Mm-hmm. Yep. Charles and I, we've been talking through email for I think like the better part of this year. Of course, getting time zones and schedules right. But again, thank you so much for reaching out. And for any developers watching, again, if you'd like to come on and talk about your games or just about game dev in general, I'm always happy to have you on. So definitely feel free to reach out. So, since this is your first time on the cast, Charles, can you talk a little bit about what your game dev background is? And then we'll kind of talk about making that move from modder to kind of like full-time game dev.
Oh man, where do I start? It's a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I've always been had a creative side, like been interested in art, ancient history, and of course PC games, that sort of thing. And then like I never really like had any formal training, with game dev or anything, that sort of thing. So I played a lot of games, like growing up, like starting with like the likes of Commander Keen, Age of Empires, that sort of thing. And then when I discovered Titan Quest, like everything changed. In terms of professions and career and stuff like that, though, Josh, I mean, like I said, mixed bag. Like I've been to uni, studied teaching, like taught for a few years. And then I also completed an apprenticeship in the trades, so going through all of that sort of stuff. And then like the modding side of things was just like a hobby on the side that I was doing throughout kind of the years, and then that turned into what I really wanted to do, I suppose. So, but the industry here in New Zealand, like I mean, of course, you have like Grinding Gear Games. That's probably the biggest one that people recognize with Path of Exile in Auckland. I'm down here in Hamilton. We have like a couple of small studios here. Wellington is kind of the main creative center, especially for film. Of course, like Lord of the Rings, all of that sort of stuff that we're known for. But game development, I mean, in my opinion, from what I've seen, like it's more kind of tailored towards mobile or like kind of the casual space in a way, rather than like hardcore PC centric kind of stuff. That's what I really am into. So that's kind of a bit of background about myself and kind of a feel for what the industry is like over here. I don't know. Have you interviewed many people from outside of the world?
From outside the United States, definitely. I've spoken to developers from Australia, South Korea. I've seen some to like developers from Africa. I think the only continent left I haven't spoken to someone is Antarctica. I think that's the only one that I haven't had any chance to speak to a game dev on.
Yeah.
Definitely very interesting story. Pony left a question. We'll get to that one when we talk a bit more about kind of like ARPG design, especially about doing your programming and modding work. But for kind of talking about kind of like the state of game dev in New Zealand, you mentioned, of course, again, the Grinding Gear, Path of Exile, probably easily one of the more recognizable ARPGs in the space. I guess one question I always like to ask when I have developers from kind of like outside the United States, especially from my audience, I guess besides like Grinding Gear and the ones you mentioned, like how has like have you noticed any like changes, or how has like the game dev space like grown in New Zealand, like kind of like over the last decade, or has it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's grown a lot. Like it started to get a lot more attention. And I think a lot of that is probably to do, with the major success of Grinding Gear games. And then there's also I think it's Rocket Works. The main developer. I believe they were involved with DayZ, that game. I think it was a kind of a zombie survival type of game. And then yeah, so that was kind of another one. But yeah, I think overall it's grown a lot. Like this year, there was sort of an announcement around like funding, like more funding for studios over in New Zealand, because especially trying to compete with the like Australia and everywhere else around the world, they have more incentives for and that support their development studios, and so we're trying to compete with them, and yeah, so this year, like they've sort of made a bit more of a push for that. We also have things like the New Zealand GDC down here, which is usually in Wellington. And yeah, I'll actually be doing a talk there this year, which will be pretty exciting as well. But yeah, so we have things like that. But yeah, I don't really, yeah, apart from that, I don't really have much kind of further insight. But just from what I've noticed, it's just really like, yeah, like I said, a lot of kind of mobile centric stuff. Which is fine because that market's huge, and so that brings in a lot of revenue and that sort of thing. But I think it's cool to see more up and coming studios, and I want to kind of for myself just share my story, I guess, and just to encourage young other like aspiring modders or devs, especially down here, because I don't know, like I've always kind of always felt like we have this sort of mentality that little New Zealand, we're kind of the little guy, we how we can't really compete with the big boys, over in the States and Europe and that sort of thing. And that can sometimes, make you or cause you not to like, branch out or like put yourself out there. And yeah, and I think it's important to do that, of course. And yeah, I don't know.
Yep, and I've heard like similar things. So I've interviewed developers from Brazil. I even had kind of from a developer interviewed from Jamaica. This was like about like 4 or 5 years ago, and yeah, like it's definitely I think a little daunting for like countries that have not really had like as big of a game dev space as again like United States, like Canada, Europe, and so on. And like we are seeing like similar pools in Brazil. I know Brazil has been doing a lot to kind of raise their own kind of game dev awareness over like the past 5 to 6 years. And it sounds like New Zealand is also trying to do something similar there. And like we said a few minutes ago, with like grinding gear, like they were kind of, I think, at least from like my understanding, they were probably like the first studio from the area to kind of really break out into the global space. And that is something very interesting about like when we're talking to like international developers about kind of like that first studio to make their particular region a lot more known. Like again, we talk about like Poland, of course that's CG Project Red and them in that respect, and it's going to be interesting to see where this all kind of shakes up, as I'm surely as you're well aware, I'm sure as our audience, like so much about like how game dev has changed over the past 10 years has been making everyone more globalized or globally centric. That's not just about making a game that's specifically for a United States audience or specifically for Brazil or New Zealand, but trying to make games that can reach, across the oceans and connect to people.
Yeah, definitely, man. Like, especially, like when it comes to remote work, like that's just opened everything up. Like, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if it wasn't for that. Having the ability to collaborate overseas with other studios and that sort of thing. But grinding gear games, like I know we kind of keep coming back to them, but that's like the classic. I mean, those dudes. I think there was 4 of the founders, and they started in their garage, just like with their computers, like creating prototypes for Path of Exile, and then I think they were also at the forefront of things like having like a kind of a live game where it's more accepted to have that model of microtransactions to fund things, because that obviously in the past that's left a bad taste in people's mouths. But nowadays, it's like I think that there's still that that divide on the subject, but it is a more accepted. Like as long as, of course, whoever it is, the developer or the publisher doesn't go overboard with just predatory stuff or whatever it is, loot boxes. But I think Path of Exile, their model has been pretty good. Like they've done well with it.
And I talk about them in my book I wrote on the free-to-play market, which, again, shameless plug for everyone watching. Go pick that one up if you can get to it. But yeah, like Path of Exile and Warframe both launched in the same year, and both did like phenomenally well in the space. And if we get on like free-to-play design, we'll be here for a good while. To get back to like your own game dev path. You mentioned, of course, Titan Quest as kind of like your first, like a game that really inspired you. So, like, what about Titan Quest kind of like inspired you to like work with it and kind of like go into the ARPG genre specifically?
Yeah, man. Well, like I never started with like the classic Diablo series. Like my first introduction to ARPGs and the whole genre was Titan Quest. So right from the beginning with that, like I was hooked, and like not only with like the type of game it is, like the sort of addictive, loot collection and the real time combat and all of that sort of stuff, but it's just the whole setting and the period piece of TQ. Like it's just awesome. Like as I mentioned earlier, that I've always been interested in ancient history and stuff. Like I traveled overseas to the Middle East. Like I went to Egypt and like I always wanted to go there, and especially ancient Egypt. Like because of course in TQ you go to Act 2, which is set in ancient Egypt, and like it was just amazing. And especially, I mean, the game came out in 2006, and I mean I'm obviously biased, but I think like the graphics just hold up. Like even now, like it's pretty cool. So there was kind of that aspect of it, and then I just kept playing it, and then eventually I thought, okay, well, how can I want to have a look at what I can do with the game. Like let's have a look at the modding tools. Let's see what I can produce, and just my own sort of project, and then it just went from there, man.
Yeah, and like Titan Quest, like as you said, like I do think it really does still hold up pretty well, especially again since the fact they've been releasing expansions for it over the last decade.
Yeah.
So with like how you got started, as we said at the start that you kind of went from being a modder to going into like working at the studio to do stuff along those lines. So what kind of mods were you making? Like, were you making mods specifically for Titan Quest or for like other games?
No, just for Titan Quest. Yeah, so I started like making a map. Like I just jumped into the editor really, and I just had this idea because I always kind of came back to Act 2. So I was like, well, I want to kind of expand the whole Egypt kind of part of it, and I especially love the dungeon crawling. So I just went into that and started exploring that. And then like I also like I was just learning. Like the problem with TQ and especially with modding, like, and was that it's because it's an old game. There's only like it comes with a modding guide, right? Like the original devs released a modding guide with it, but it's only kind of an overview, and it's quite limited. Like especially if you want to go a bit deeper into things. And so a lot of it was just trial and error, Josh, and like. A lot of devs, can talk about, like you just try things and it doesn't work and you go back, and so there was a lot of that and a lot of kind of learning through that sort of process, and then I was trying to like dig through and find other documentation about how to do kind of stuff with the art manager and that sort of thing, and then I just kept building on top of what I had. And then I kind of I had set it in kind of this loose world, like based on the 1999 Mummy movie. So it's kind of like these random collections of things. Because I don't know if you've heard any interviews with the original guys from Iron Law, like specifically Arthur Bruno, but he talks about how um, when you first enter Titan Quest, you're in this idyllic kind of picturesque world, which is great. But then once you leave town, there was always this lack of danger, like this sense of peril. Like the monsters are kind of just there, in the fields and stuff, and you're running around, and so I took that and I wanted to introduce a bit more of that theme, of danger and kind of a bit of a darker vibe, but not too much because I didn't want to. I mean, that's part of the kind of DNA of Titan Quest is that it's distinctive from the like dark and gritty kind of gory world of the Diablo series, But having said that, I still think that there should be like especially when you enter a dungeon or something, you should feel like, oh man, okay, this area, I need to like watch my step, I don't know what's around the next corner. It shouldn't just be like you cruise in there and there's nothing to care about, there's no sense of peril. So I tried to add that into my mod, and yes, so I was playing around with the different tools, the lighting, all of that sort of stuff, and then eventually I started. I created a development thread on the TQ forums and just started sharing what I'd been making, and I also uploaded like stuff to the ModDB website as well. And then eventually I created a website for the mod and kind of showing the progress as it was going and just kind of getting just putting it out there really just for people to see and like the community and that sort of thing. And it just kept growing. But of course, with learning everything and all that, Josh, like what I had started with was just so inferior to like what I had ended up with like years later once I had learned how to actually do level design and all of that sort of stuff. And so I actually started with the mod started with just like the kind of the city of the dead, like in Hamanupsha. But then I was like, okay, this is the ending of the mod, so I need to go right back and like make a beginning, and then you go adventure through, and then you end up at the necropolis, right? And then so I started doing that, and like all the usual problems, or not problems, but like all the usual kind of like traps, I guess, that new devs fall into started occurring. Like, of course, feature creep. Like, I kept adding and adding stuff onto the mod, and then it's just it just like kept blowing it out, and so I needed to rein it in a bit.
When did you first start working on the mod?
I was around about 2013, 2014. And then I started like putting stuff online and the website and everything about 2018. Yeah, so by then, like, I think the anniversary edition released in 2016, and then following that was Ragnarok, and then Atlantis.
Yep. So I guess for the next question then, so while you're working on the mod, how did you get like noticed by the studio in terms of coming on to work on Eternal Embers?
Yeah, well, like I said, because I put everything out, like my progress and the development and stuff online on forums and on ModDB. I also reached out to like a bunch of the usual PC gaming media like IGN, PC Gamer. Down here we have PC Power Play, which is like an Australian kind of media that covers games, and then also Kotaku. And then one of them got back to me, which was Kotaku, and then they wrote an article about the game, and so that was really cool. Like, I think that went a long way into sort of getting my mod and my name out there a bit more, so there was that, and then also I noticed that a lot of the mods for Titan Quest, the majority of them are focused around like creating new masteries, because TK has the mastery system where you can choose from And so people love to mod the game and create new masteries and see what they can do there, because then that of course opens up new builds and that sort of stuff, and that's of course a lot of the fun of the game. But for myself, yeah, I was creating a new world, like a new campaign to go through, and so I think that was another thing that stood out, especially for like down the track with what THQ wanted was, they needed guys to create the new world, a new expansion. And so anyway, so from that and then I reached out to THQ and just like I basically was like thinking, okay, what can I do with the mod? And there's a sort of thing, Josh, like, how I guess there's this unspoken rule amongst modders that, you're making it for the community. You're like, how dare you try and sell what you're working on, that sort of thing. And of course, there's the whole problem of it's you don't own the IP, right? So you can't actually sell it anyway. But I think you would be kind of, it is a bit of a, maybe lie is not the right word, but it's kind of one of those things that I think it's always in the back of modders' minds of like, you're kind of lying to yourself if you think that modders throughout like all of the process, they haven't at one point thought, oh man, how can I, like, this is my passion, but is there some way that I could like make this a living off of this, or a career or something? And so I had the same thought in my head. And so I was just trying to work out, is there any possible way? And then, okay, let's just go straight to the publisher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they say yes, then that's awesome, but most likely they'll say no. But of course, THQ came back to me, and the first thing they said was, yeah, Charlie, we've actually had your mod on our radar. And so they must, like, there's either the Kotaku thing or like wherever else I had like shared stuff, and they had seen it, and it just went from there, man. Yeah, but it was a long process, like from that point of them contacting me and saying, yes, we're interested in doing something with what you have, to then like starting to actually work on an official expansion for Titan Quest.
Mm-hmm. In terms of like, at the point that you reached out to THQ, like, how far along was the mod at that point?
It had a lot of content. It had the whole beginning going right through to the main city, and then right through actually to the necropolis almost. So like it was like, I don't know, I estimated around like good 8 hours of content, like just to explore through, and that might be if you're rushing through it as well, like because the way I was designing things, like I was, because TQ is a lot of TQ is very linear, like map design, and so I was kind of taking cues from Grim Dawn, because they have these sort of open areas which bottleneck, like you can explore this open kind of zone, and then eventually it will bottleneck, into the like the path or the main road forward, and then it will kind of open out again. And so I was doing a lot of that, which also expanded the playtime. And then there was just way too many dungeons. So yeah, it was quite sizable, man. And then I also introduced things like I'd worked hard on creating what I call non-grid dungeons, or terrain-based dungeons, which is like you take the height map or the terrain, and then you change the lighting so that you basically remove the sun and the moon, like, and light from that, and the shadows and that sort of stuff, so that it creates like this underground feeling, right? And then once you achieve that with the terrain map, it opens up way more possibilities with what you can create with dungeons, right? Whereas the old system, it uses this grid-based tile set, and so you're restricted to basically a given tile set to make dungeons, and what the special kind of tile pieces that come with that set have. And then, I mean, of course, you can add in props and set dress it as much as you can, but the foundation of the dungeon is always restricted to the grid system. And so I learned, I got the idea to make the terrain ones from Grim Dawn as well, because those guys, they did away with the grid system. And I mean, I'm sure you're aware, Josh. Like the guys at Crate, they came from from Iron Law, which are the guys that created TQ.
Mm-hmm.
Like not all of them, but definitely the lead designer Arthur Bruno. So yeah, I was just looking, and of course Grim Dawn is built on top of the old TQ engine as well. So I was just looking at kind of the way they had done things and pushed what the engine could do, and I wanted to introduce stuff like that as well.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk a little bit more about kind of the level design and kind of like your approach or like general approach to it. But I think this is a good time to bring up this question that Pony in chat posted from my friend Thorn, who's also very much into like ARPG design, ARPG like building like that. So if you can see it in chat, is the one about how do you code tier sets? Is that something that you are familiar with?
Not really, Pony. With all the itemization and that sort of thing, that was the other designers that handled that. So I can't really speak to how those are like implemented or how they're created in terms of their mods and stats and that sort of thing. I mean, with modding, like I created items and stuff for the mod. Like as a modder, you wear lots of different hats, right? Because you've got to create the world, you got to add in monsters, add in new items, and all of that sort of stuff. And so I did that, and I did create sets as well. But like at the time that I was doing that, it was still kind of in the early stages, and it wasn't really. It was kind of like I don't think it was like an accurate way or the best way to set things like sets up and like stats and modifiers and all that sort of stuff. Like I think I was just kind of exploring stuff, learning how it goes and that sort of thing. But when it comes to Eternal Embers and the official expansion, that was all handled by someone else.
Okay. And hopefully that we'll see if any more questions like that. But I do want to touch on like kind of like the level design approach for Eternal Embers, your mod, and just kind of like an ARPG design in general. You mentioned, of course, like Tiny Quest having more of a linear, very like strict pathing you go through in each one of the areas. When we go to something like with Grim Dawn, even to like what we see with Diablo 3, Diablo 4, they tend to focus more on very wide areas. Like here's just like this massive chunk of area, run around, maybe there's like a dungeon over here, a cave over there. So like for you, do you prefer kind of the more like linear style? Or do you like kind of these like blobs of areas to explore, like more like wider environments?
Yeah, I mean, I like to have a balance of both, really. Like we've said, Titan Quest is quite linear, and so I wanted to introduce more of those open, wide areas to explore. And so I would create these open areas and then try and have all the fundamentals of level design, like alternate paths, like looping areas, so that to avoid backtracking. Always have like the distinctive main road going through. Have like variations of like elevation, different vista points, stuff like that. And then it would be good to sort of balance that out with like some other like stretches beyond that of more linear paths where you're following through and you can feel that pacing and the progression through the level, and then it will open out again. So I tried to kind of stick with that, and I think it's a tricky thing, man, because there are certain expectations that the Titan Quest community have with levels, right? And what's come before. And so when you try and introduce new kind of stuff like that, there's going to be people that love it, and then people that are just like, oh man, this makes my run so much longer, or like I just don't know where to go because it's got this huge open space. And so there was kind of that contrasting views, and I think that just comes with like introducing new stuff, but also like of course some of my levels, they didn't have the best flow, they didn't have like things like additional player guidance, like placing torches or just like the flow of like where the main road goes and that sort of thing, or just having way too many kind of branching areas out that like just go away from like where the main road should go or where the player should progress. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that I learned, and just really interesting to hear feedback from the community and what they like and what they didn't like. And I think that follows through to dungeons as well, but that's a whole nother topic.
We'll probably touch on that one in a few minutes. Yeah, like the level design is always very tricky to do in these games because they're inherently meant to be just kind of the path to the next piece of loot. And there's some people who they're not caring about whether we're running through a swampland, a castle, a dungeon. It's just basically enemy path, enemy path, enemy path, treasure, boss, rinse and repeat. And it is one of those areas where it's a lot harder, it feels like, to kind of innovate on compared to some of the other aspects. Like, even with, like, Grim Dawn, like, I even found myself getting a little bit bored of just, like, the general pathing through. Like, at some point, it just kind of all blurs together as just, where's the next loot source I can get to?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of that comes with, like, you got to have, like, these distinctive areas, and not just distinctive in terms of the aesthetics, but also in terms of the layouts and in terms of like how you progress through them. So I don't know. I think you just have to have that balance, and try and refine it. Try and make it like as easy as possible. If there are those players that just want to run straight through that, okay, this is the main road. I don't have to worry about any of the extra stuff. But also, cater to those people like myself that love to just branch out and explore the whole map before I go through. And I mean that's another point that especially comes to the whole dungeon topic, Josh, is like, learning to create levels and have in mind that you need to respect the player's time. Because like, I mean, I can create these massive levels, right? But it's just, especially with the dungeons and stuff, like I can create multi-tiered dungeons, which I did. But sometimes like you need to just think, you really need to think about respecting the player's time and how long it's going to take them to get through it. And then, the balance between a side area and then like progressing in the main storyline and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of, especially with the dungeons game, there's a lot of that where I didn't take that into account, because I was just thinking, oh man, like let's just have these multi-level dungeons where you can just like really sink your teeth into them and do an awesome dungeon crawl and that sort of thing, without thinking about like the actual, someone might just they might just see a dungeon entrance. Oh, sweet! I'll just do this little side dungeon, but then it turns into this like hour-long crawl, which is not what they want. I mean, don't get me wrong; we can have some of those sprinkled throughout, but not, every dungeon you encounter, right?
And like, speaking about kind of like this balance, that's something I want to ask you about as someone who kind of went from modder to working at a studio. One of the things that we've seen, like, when it comes to kind of mod-based projects, or like the last like 20 or so years, has been kind of that push and pull between making something specifically for the hardcore fan, the person who is going to rip apart this game, mod it, maybe even do a complete full or partial conversion mod for a game, and trying to balance that with making something that is, I guess, like, quote-unquote, palatable to a general consumer. A good example of this would be the entire like Kaizo industry for like Mario Maker, Super Mario hacks, and stuff like that, where a lot of people know about them, but they also know that they are just completely inaccessible unless you're already, top tier grandmaster at these games.
Yeah.
So my question for you, like, with like taking this mod and then having a chance to develop it into an actual expansion, what was it like trying to kind of like balance this between making something for that hardcore super fan of Titan Quest, versus making it for someone who is maybe like a casual to moderate fan who is just looking for more TQ in their life?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess I should go back to the beginning of the expansion, because it was, yeah, from the beginning it was pitched like internally as, this is going to be an end game expansion for the more veteran Titan Quest players. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that, like, right off the bat, and you probably have seen that it's like Eternal Embers is exclusively for the legendary difficulty,
Mm-hmm.
and so I mean that is great for those players, the long-time veterans, the guys that just have made like hundreds of builds, and something to really, challenge them, and then like acquire, better items and fight harder bosses and all that sort of stuff. But then on the other hand, like, I think it contributed to a lot of the kind of negative
Mm-hmm.
coverage of the game, or impressions, just because there's also a massive player base for Titan Quest that are, more on the casual end, and they
Mm-hmm.
only like they only play through normal. They don't, or they still want to experience content, but they can never get to legendary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, having said that, we did introduce, like, if you get the expansion, there is an option to just create like a level 70 character in legendary, right off, so you can actually just jump into the expansion. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that was that you get to the first cave, and then there's like this chest there, which provides you, it's meant to provide you with like some items, some items that will like give you like a head start, or at least help you to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course you get given all your stat points and stuff, so that you can, like, you got a level 70 fresh, like, template, and then you just like, you get your masteries, you build, do your
Mm-hmm.
build, and then you equip these items, and then you're on your way. But the problem was that the items just, they weren't like, they were nowhere near good enough for the players, for those players that didn't have, um, they didn't have, like, specific, like a whole stash full of like legacy items, or stuff from other characters that they've collected. Because we
Mm-hmm.
found a lot of people would go in, and then there's like a caravan right in the kind of beginning area, and then you can just basically go there and then equip a whole bunch of stuff, like better stuff that then was provided in that initial chest, so that you can actually survive. um, so there was kind of, yeah, those issues with the whole legendary part of it. But yeah, like, I think we, yeah, like I said, it was catered towards like the more end game type of audience. And so, like, in terms of level design, I was creating like these areas where, it would allow for some more, epic boss fights, or some more like, some more ways to explore, and to just really push your character, and challenge them. Like for example, you have areas where, um, you can't attack, like, if you're a melee character, you can't attack the ranged ones until you, like, kind of, fight your way through the melee enemies, and then you circle around to the ranged ones. It's kind of stuff like that. Or even just having like longer, yeah, like the dungeons and stuff, um having stuff that they can really sink their teeth into, that they can crawl through, and like find extra treasure and loot and stuff. Yeah, so there was kind of like a mixture of that sort of stuff in there. Yeah, I think I'm forgetting some stuff, but hope that answers part of it.
Yep, and that's the kind of challenge when we talk about like expansions and mods, or like expansion in particular for like long lasting games like that. Is that if you go into it saying like this is meant for, end game max character kind of stuff, it can be very annoying or frustrating for someone who picks up saying, well, I can't, do anything with it. And when we talk about kind of what we've seen like with like Diablo, and even with something like with Grim Dawn, like both of them, like with Grim Dawn in particular, I know some of their expansions were kind of designed to be both specifically like endgame tier, And then there are some expansions that you could just kind of do like at any point in the game, and of course it would scale the loot and stuff accordingly.
Yeah, yeah. I also forgot to mention that, and this because this kind of came later, like after the initial expansion was released, we had this support period after the game, and of course, that's typically to fix bugs and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But credit to Norbert, who was the kind of the CEO of Digital Arrow. He was like, no, let's add some more content, but not just to the expansion. Let's add it to the base game for everyone to enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And from that came these hardcore dungeons. So that's another thing that was kind of an extra like challenge for players to kind of aim towards. And so there's 3 of them that we've introduced: one in Greece, one in Egypt, and then one in Hades, Immortal Throne expansion area.
Mm-hmm.
And so those require, like, you have to farm the bosses, and then they will drop their respective keys, which you need 3 of them, I believe, to unlock the dungeon. And then once you've done that, it's like unlocked,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can explore the dungeon. But they're a lot, like, they're catered to a lot more challenge. The enemies in them, not only like their skill sets, but just like the enemy density is a lot higher. And then of course the bosses, and then we also added like exclusive items that you can only get from these dungeons. So we added some stuff like that as well, which I think was really cool. Like we originally wanted to, like, we had this idea before the expansion was released, but there was just, because of deadlines and stuff, there was just too much other stuff to get in there and to finish off and polish, and so this was just basically pushed out. But I'm really happy that we were able to introduce those, like, later on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of like Grim Dawn's, like how they have the roguelike dungeons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to that.
So, I guess, like, speaking about like difficulty and level design, I think that's a good point to bring up this question for you. Like, enemy design in an RPG, like, this is something that I don't think we've really seen like that much in terms of like evolution or new stuff from the genre in like the past like 30 years. Like, we've seen enemies either go one of 2 routes: either, groups and groups of enemies just there for you to blow up. Just use whatever AoE attack, bones go flying. Like, I think it was like my first real like aha moment from Titan Quest, when you fight like the skeletons for the first time, you hit him with like a shield bash or whatever, and full ragdoll physics on all the bones, like flying all over the map. And then like the other kind of enemy design is very much the hell sponges. These are, your bosses, where usually the most advanced strategy is run in, hit. Oh, enemy's about to do a heavy attack, back away, then go back in, hit, and rinse and repeat. And I wanted to ask, like, again, building this mod and then working on the expansion, what kind of like was like the challenge or your approach to, I guess, making any kind of like interesting new enemy designs or any kind of interesting new boss designs?
Yeah, for enemies, like, I approached it with, like, once again, looking at Grim Dawn. Like, they have their sort of like their group of fodder enemies, but then it goes up in tiers, and so they have their champion enemies within that family, like, the undead or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they had the revenants, and then it goes up into the elites, or which, you might have, like, in Titan Quest, you have the hero monster class, which have like the little star above their head, and they've got like a specific name and a skill set. And so I would create kind of based on that, like the family, the group of enemies, and then, like, I guess I would also look at what had been established already within the database for monsters, and how were they set up, and how did, what kind of dynamics and mechanics did they have, and how can I kind of build upon that. And so I wanted to have like the classic archetypes of like the really tanky undead, or the tanky enemies that are slow moving But if you do get hit by them, man, like you're gonna feel it. They're
Mhm.
gonna like critical hit you and that sort of stuff. And then I wanted to have like a mixture, a good mix of the melee versus the ranged guys, and then the spellcasters as well. And so just thinking about stuff where there's like good crowd control from them, but not too much. Like I think that was a bit of a pitfall as well. Of there's just mechanics that just become annoying, especially if you have to think about like if there's a big group of these mages that like freeze you or something. Like it's just you just get stun locked, or whatever it is, and so you have to be careful about how if you want to add something like that, how spread out and what's the pacing like between these different enemy groups. And yeah, like you don't want it, you want it to be challenging but not become frustrating for the player. And for bosses were like, yeah, there was a lot of. And I'm just talking in terms of my mod because, like, when the expansion, that was not really my role. But for the mod, like, I spent a lot of time just thinking about, how to really kind of introduce some more like interesting fights into Titan Quest. And thinking about even the staging, like you walk into the chamber, and there might be environmental hazards that you have to deal with at the same time as the boss itself. Or I had one where there was like the classic, like you walk into the chamber, there's like this lone sarcophagus, and nothing happens until you click on the sarcophagus. And then in addition to the boss spawning, there's like multiple like minions that spawn with him, right? And then I also add effects, like some cool visual effects to when he spawns, like different flavor like that. And then he would have kind of um, three different main attacks. He would also have things like an aura, to like, because you have to think about how's this boss going to deal with, heaps of different builds that the character throws at him. Like the spellcasters and the range builds versus the melee guys.
Yep.
So, and a lot of the time that's where the minions come in, so that they can like send their minions out to like kind of keep kind of throwing them at the ranged dudes. And then like he has his strong attacks and his auras for the melee guys. And then also I wanted to have things like, he might have a second form, so you just think that you've killed him, and then oh no, surprise, he's got a second form, and he grows bigger, he changes his mechanics up, that sort of thing. But once again, man, it's all about balance. You have to be careful of not going overboard and kind of not becoming, not making it all frustrating for the player, because there's nothing worse than like you have that second form, but then it just drags it out and it just becomes like a sponge that you're just constantly hitting, and it's not interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And the whole kind of like balance between melee and range builds is another very important challenge, at least of just about like any kind of ARPG design. Because one of the things that we've seen is that there are some games where the enemy cannot be like stunned, frozen, pushed back, anything, and they're just like, the whole thing is like they just walk up and just smack you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, like one shot you.
Yeah, and that's
exactly.
never has happened to me in an ARPG, not at all. Or having like a very tanky melee build, and then just turns into like the old like puppets just like hitting each other for like 20 minutes straight. Oh, my health's at like.
I think there's a lot of like complaints from Diablo 4 recently, or like when it first released, because you know how they have that, I think it's called like the bone ballista or something, and it's like this dude that can just fire like this arrow from off screen, because the camera is also so zoomed in. I don't know why they did that, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so like you'll just have this massive like arrow come at you from off screen, and it's pretty strong. And if you're not, especially if you've been fighting enemies and your health is already down, and then you get hit by this, like you don't, you're just gone, and then you don't know what's happened, and inevitably players will just start complaining, like what is this design?
Because what we need in hardcore mode is getting an artillery struck from off screen.
Exactly. Add to that the whole hardcore mode. Yeah, man, it's a bad recipe.
Let's
for
see.
sure.
Question came in from Kittis. I do have one question for you before we get one, because I think it's a good like follow up, or it's a good segue into it. Earlier, you mentioned that you started working on the mod in 2013. Titan Quest Anniversary Edition was released and all that in 2016. While you were like kind of like working on the mod, like what were like kind of like your thoughts when you heard that Titan Quest is just now coming back all of a sudden? Like, because I remember like back in 2016, like that hit a lot of us. Just like, wait, they're doing another. Wait, Titan Quest is coming back. I thought like that was all gone. Like it just like
I
surprised a
know,
lot
man.
of us.
Yeah, I know. I was the same, man. Really, like I was just working away, and then Anniversary Edition released. Um, yeah, and it's just crazy because I mean, this game came out in 2006, and then I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the Immortal Throne expansion was 2007, and then there's this massive period of just nothing, and then all of a sudden, THQ like picks up the IP again, and then releases this Anniversary Edition, and then not only that, follows it up with Ragnarok. I think was it in 2017 or
Let's see,
18,
look that up.
and then yeah, Atlantis after that. Like it was just hit after hit, and I mean the whole community was like just stoked with all this extra content.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, and like in terms of for my mod, like there were some concerns because with new expansions, it changes the builds, right, and then it changes um like things become like incompatible, and so you have to go in and like alter stuff and make it like and basically update stuff so that it works with the latest official build that's out. So there's stuff like that, and like it does frustrate modders a lot, like especially if they've been working on something for a long time. um, but at the same time, man, like I mean, for example, with Eternal Embers, we early on we had like this meeting with the systems designers, like, and they said, okay guys, right, what do you need for level design, especially with the editor? What's kind of the main parts that's missing, or the main tools that are just really lacking, and how can we improve those? And so we gave them a list, because like things like we didn't have full 360-degree like pivot and like the XYZ axis for moving like assets around and stuff. It was just basically up and down, and you could rotate. Whereas, they implemented that so that you could tilt stuff, and like that, like for level design especially, that really opens up possibilities because you can take the existing assets and just like really make new compositions and move stuff around in different ways and create just like more it gives you more options with what you have. They also implemented basically like instant scaling like of objects as well, so you didn't have that. Like, so if I wanted to take some rocks or whatever it was, and I could just scale it up like within reason. You don't want to like totally scale something out of proportion, but that was really helpful as well, just to create variation. But yeah, so like that was really helpful with on the tool sides of things. But that of course was later on, after like my mod had had been introduced to the game and everything. But yeah, like it was just, I think overall, man, it was just really positive to see that THQ still had some love for the game, and it was still like a valuable IP for them, and that they wanted to, all these years later, support it. Like
Yeah, like
a lot
those.
of times, especially with the bigger publishers, that's quite unheard of.
We interrupt this podcast for a little giveaway. Charles was kind enough to give me 3 Titan Quest Eternal Embers keys to give away. So, as a special thank you, and to see how long people have been watching this podcast for, we're going to do it right now. So, all you need to do is let me know in the comments down below, what is your favorite ARPG class to play as. The first 3 people who do it will get keys. And once we have the winners, I'll let you guys know how we'll get those keys out to you. But with that said, let's get back to the cast. Yeah, and like the strangest thing was, I think THQ also supported Darksiders still. Because I know like
Yeah,
Darksiders like disappeared for like 5-6 years, and then we got the third one. We got the kind of spin-off co-op game. Like again, like it is very unusual when we see like develop or publisher, I should say, do these kinds of like long form like IP renewals. Because again, like as I'm sure like you're well aware of, I'm sure the audience watching as I record knows, like for a lot of these games that kind of turn into like mid tier, not exactly like a super hit, but still like enough that people hear about it. Usually they get end up swept into a closet somewhere, and we never hear about it ever again.
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, and that's a shame, like
Hmm.
because a lot of these games they still have a lot of life to them, and I think
Hmm.
that's why things like like adding, uh, releasing the modding tools with the game, it really keeps it alive and just you know pushes the longevity of the game overall. Because, like, I mean, you look at Grim Dawn, they did the same thing for probably the same reasons. They give it to the community. Like the latest thing is the community has like created whole new seasons, unofficial seasons for Grim Dawn, like
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then yeah, it's really valuable. um and then the games that don't have that, like, you
Hmm.
always wonder like what could have been if they had at least released the modding for it, tools for it. um
Hmm. Um,
yeah.
I interviewed the developer who created the Long War mod for XCOM. This was a while ago, and we had that very same conversation about why it's important, why there's so much viability in having like dedicated modding tools and modding features for games, because it does greatly extend the lifeblood or lifetime of a game. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
everyone here has heard of that little game Skyrim that has been released on like 8,000 platforms by now and has, infinite
And still
mods.
going.
Yeah, it will never end at this point. One thing that I wanted to touch on before we get to Kid's question, because it's something you said a minute ago about kind of the difficulty of working when like a new version of a game comes out, making sure that, it's compatible with the mod. As someone who played Payday 2 quite a bit, I remember the dread every modder had whenever they had like their annual like week of updates, because it was basically like 7 days of new patches that the modders then had to adjust and make sure their mods were compatible
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like pros and cons, right? Like, they release a patch and they fix a bunch of stuff, but then at the same time, it breaks your mod or breaks your build.
Hmm.
And so, yeah,
Oh yes.
sometimes, it's better, or it's not as bad, but then other times it's just like, oh man, this is just a headache. Um, and then,
Hmm.
like, sadly, because of that reason, sometimes people just like, they might have been through a few cycles of that, and then they've gone back and then they've updated their mod and then they've done it a couple of times, but then the third time they just have to they abandon their mod.
Yep.
um,
And it's especially if the mod is one that only has like a very like niche audience to it. Like I'm sure as a modder yourself, you probably have had those cases where someone's trying to make a mod for a game, and yeah, maybe it only has like a small following. Are they really going to dedicate themselves every new patch, every new update to then fix what was broken with the mod to then only redo it again, the next patch?
yeah, yeah, man. But
So
you gotta it's a struggle, but yeah, you gotta, like, I don't know, have a thick skin, have some perseverance, I guess, when it comes to
mhm.
modding, right?
And I think with that, that's a good segue into this question Kiddis asked earlier. How did you find the pivot change of having full creative freedom in designing your own lore and mod world, to then working in a team and building like a different lore together? Challenges, positives, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, like, it was kind of, it was actually really good, like, in that, like, I've talked about feature creep and all of that kind of stuff, because you have full creative freedom. You can do whatever you want. But when you actually, you become a dev and you're collaborating, because I was collaborating with another studio over in Serbia, Digital Arrow, to make the new expansion. And like, when I first heard about it, like, when I first heard about what the the setting was going to be, because you return to the east, right, to ancient China. And I was like, oh man, like it doesn't really interest me as much, like I'm not sure about that. But once I got into it, man, like like I started researching ancient China and like the biomes and different, settings and lore and stuff to do with China. Like I got really into it. But in terms of my own stuff, like, yeah, I mean, like I had things like I wanted to have, historical text for items. Like you pick up item and then you can like read a little blurb about what it is. Like I want to have stuff like that. And I also, Josh, I wanted to especially mention this to you because I'm also a big fan of Jeff Vogel. You know, the old uncle, grumpy uncle in the attic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I, like, throughout the mod development, I had been playing, I think it was one of the Evanum games, and I loved that. I mean, I loved the aspect of like his writing and how you would go into like an environment or a dungeon, and then there would just be like kind of a pop up or something like a note or something that you could read, and it was kind of a description of something you come across, right, or that your character came across. And so I started introducing that into my mod. Like I had one example is you'd go into a dungeon, and as you're exploring the corridor, like there would be this cold mist starts coming in, right, and then I had this pop up, or not a pop up, but like I had like this NPC hidden. Like I used one of the squirrels, and I just kind of like embedded it in like a block of stone so that you could see the little diamond thing. Like, oh, there's something to click on, and so you click on it, and then this little like lore piece would come up, basically saying like, oh, you've entered this corridor, and you feel it become colder and deathly like chilled, around the area, and like some descriptive stuff like Jeff would have. And then of course as you progress further, there's like this like ancient cold themed skeleton that you have to fight,
Mm-hmm.
and so I had stuff like that. But at the same time I was like, oh, I don't know if this really works for an action RPG, because of course Jeff's games, they're turn based, and he leans heavily on the narrative and the writing. But yeah, like that's just a little little tidbit that I wanted to mention.
I do love like just the sense out of context about putting a squirrel in a stone block and hiding in a wall somewhere.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, man.
And yeah, like if you haven't heard, well, I've had I think 1 or 2 interviews I've done with Jeff Vogt here on the channel, and he is definitely a great guy to chat with. Again, that conversation went in very weird places, if I remember, and that's a good.
Dude, I've listened to that interview like 3 or 4 times. It's so good, so funny, man. But yeah, but also to that question that Nikita asked, like, it's also, I also wanted to just mention, like, it was also a big credit to Digital Arrow and their team, because they really respected like what I had created, because you go through the first 2 kind of acts of ancient China, and then you jump over to ancient Egypt, which that whole portion is my mod, right? And then once you get through Egypt, you jump back to China to finish off the expansion. And so they really respected what I had, like within reason. Like of course there was stuff in there, lore stuff or stuff that just was just needed to be taken out for various reasons, or copyright or whatever it was. And so of course I did that, but by and large they respected what I had, and they would always kind of consult me with like, hey Charlie, we want to make a change here, or we want to introduce something here, like what do you think about that? And yeah, but then from that there was also came some more kind of learning moments. Whereas like one example was they wanted to introduce Imhotep. I don't know if you remember, he's like a main character, one of the NPCs you meet when you first get to base game Egypt. And they were like, oh, it would be cool to have like Imhotep return and you're in your Egypt, and then you talk to him and stuff. And straight away I was like, oh yeah, that would be great, like it'd be cool to just meet these recurring characters. But I didn't think about the larger picture, And and I'm talking specifically about like localization and stuff like that, because of course the old voice actors, they're long gone, and so whoever you get the new, like he's just not going to sound the same. He won't have the same kind of presence or feeling, I guess, or vibe. And I mean that's a big part of specific characters, especially if they're part of the mainline story. And so he got added in there, but yeah, a lot of the like sort of comments I saw and stuff were like, "Oh man, like Imhotep's there, but he's not. He's just not the same." It's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's always one of those very like it's so easy to miss like detail when it comes to some of these games, especially again when you have full voice acting or full voiceover in like the previous title. Who comes back, whose voice gets changed, and that can lead to a lot of hiccups. Especially like I'm sure another thing that may have slipped your mind when you're doing the mod going to the full game was again like localization into different languages. How is this going to read in French, Chinese, Russian, so on and so on.
Yeah, man. I think a lot of that just comes with experience. Being in the industry, being a part of the production cycle, and what goes into that, and thinking about what has come before and what you can achieve now. Especially if it's a game that has been out for so long, you have to be careful with what you want to introduce, and if you want to kind of reintroduce characters and stuff like that, you have to go about it in a careful way. Like I also had the idea to bring back Zazamank. Like you go to Memphis in the original game, and he's basically just a side quest character in the town, and he sends you to the Great Pyramid to retrieve the staff of Khufu, because he's like, I need the staff to reclaim the power, so that people believe that we still have power and all this kind of stuff. And he's kind of a bit dodgy, like the way he talks and stuff. He's like, I don't know if I trust you. So I thought, it'd be cool to build on him, and maybe like he took the staff for nefarious purposes, right? And then in my mod, or in my part of the expansion, he returns, and because he got the staff, and so now he's causing all these problems with it, and he becomes a boss. And I mean that's all very well, and like being a boss, he didn't necessarily need to have any VO, right? He could just you encounter him, and then he's a boss, and you fight him, and that sort of thing. So that kind of avoids the whole localization issue there in a way. But of course, the designers they did want to have some dialogue with him, and so there was that. But also, I had kind of different views of how I wanted to introduce him. Like I prefer the more serious kind of like this character he's been corrupted. He's more dark. He's more serious. He's scary, whereas TQ has a little bit of like humor and like kind of cheesiness, throughout. Like a little bit of lightheartedness, right? Not all the time, but they really, like, especially for this particular character, Zazamank, they really leaned on the kind of him being kind of this sort of cheesy, kind of whimsical, almost like boss. Like when you talk to him and stuff, he's kind of like going off about being like a maniac and like with his power and stuff. And it wasn't really my vision, but like that's another example of how you can have an idea about a character, but ultimately, like if you're collaborating, especially, people have different ideas, and I don't know, it doesn't always go the way you expect.
Yep.
But just quickly, Josh, I wanted to also mention, just on voice acting, I was watching one of your runs, man, one of your old playthroughs of TQ, and you mentioned Steve Bloom, the voice actor. You're like, oh, that's Steve Bloom again, because he voices like a couple of characters in Titan Quest, and I think you mentioned like, oh, he's in this guy's in everything, like he's in the Diablo series as well. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah. I guess as another part, like the question from Kitas, when you kind of made that shift from working on as a modder to being a part of the studio and having it turn in, for like any like potential modders or students like watching this right now, any like major takeaways or things that kind of surprised you about kind of going from making this as a mod to then going to work on a team and actually be a part of a studio with this project, as opposed to, again, working on this on your own?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, huge, man, huge. Like for a start, you have to like my whole routine changed. I mean, I still had a day job, right?
Mhm.
And I would just do this in the evening. Whereas now, I would go to work during the day, and then once I finished work, I'd come home and then have a few hours, and then I'd have to start work because there's the time difference as well, right? Like in order to be online with the other team, I need to start late afternoon here in New Zealand when they're just starting their morning, right? So there was that sort of adjustment, and then like none of this stuff, like you don't have any like experience, or it's hard to grasp what goes on behind the scenes with game development. Like I mean, of course there's videos and there's GDC talks and stuff like that, but when you're there and experiencing it, there's heaps of stuff that they don't talk about, like the whole like pre-production and what you do with that, all the stuff that you have to set up on your end,
Mhm.
because every day you're working with these repository systems and stuff so that you can upload your latest work, um, to the repository, and then and so you have to go through that and learn that system. And I remember I was like, man, this is a lot of stuff to learn. Like I don't know how I'm going to kind of get used to it. And one of the guys who was showing me is like, oh, don't worry, man. Like you'll be using this every day to submit your work at the end of the day. And so it's just going to become like driving a car or whatever it is, because you just use it every day. And he was right. Like a lot of these kind of systems that you have to use, they just like from the beginning they seem quite complex, but in reality, like once you start using them, it's fine. So there was a lot of that stuff I had to learn, and then things like you have to learn about when to actually like put in requests, because there's the whole art department, right? And making a new game, or a new expansion, you want to, you might have ideas for a new level and stuff, but you need to request new assets, right, and
Mhm.
new art for certain things. But there's a kind of a window of opportunity to do that, and then once that's passed,
Mhm.
it's hard to kind of approach them and say, hey, can I have this? It just kind of puts their whole production out, and you don't want to be that guy. So
You'll
I had to learn a lot of that sort of stuff as well.
you won't be that guy like 9% done saying, "Hey, can we add like two more levels?" Or, "Hey, I really thought maybe we could have like another hour-long section here. We can push the game back, right?" And
Yeah,
become
and there
the
was a lot of stuff like I was always like at the beginning, I was a bit a bit worried about like kind of giving criticism, or giving some feedback on some stuff, but talking to different, like the art people, or whoever it was, like they were all just really professional, and basically like everyone is there to make the best thing possible. And if you had some feedback, no one should really take it personally, right? You should just listen,
Mhm.
and as long as it's delivered in the appropriate way, then listen to what they're saying, and then and move forward, right? And so so I learned that okay, this is the way things are done, and it's perfectly fine to talk to the artist about, hey, this is actually not quite how an Egyptian statue like should be, or this particular thing, whatever it is, and can we kind of make some adjustments here? And as long as you're, like I said, within that window of opportunity, and like it's the right time to give that feedback, and they can like go into ZBrush or whatever it is and change some things, then it's perfectly fine to do that. Um, yeah.
Mhm. All right. As a quick time check, we've been going for about an hour and 15. I think I do want to talk about like what you're currently doing now with Unearthed. Before we get to that, any other aspects about working on Eternal Embers you want to bring up? And for anyone who's watching us live, do you have any other questions about Eternal Embers side of things before we kind of move into like the final part of our discussion?
yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about like some of the post-launch stuff that happened with the Eternal Embers. Like we released 6 patches, and yeah, we fixed heaps of bugs. Like I wanted to have a shout out to my colleague Dimitri, or Demon. His name's Demonoida on the forums and stuff. He went through so much of the game, especially with Atlantis, because Atlantis had like some really bad performance issues, and he was notorious for that. And like one of the things was like underneath the terrain, like there was this massive water plane, and it was just like right throughout underneath the terrain. And so he kind of cleaned that up, and there was just heaps of like just a lot of draw calls in many locations, just because of the amount of assets and particle effects and that sort of stuff. So he just kind of went through and tidied all that up. So that was really cool. There was also issues with the monsters and like the way their bones were set up and that sort of stuff, like when you kill them. But yeah, that's kind of more technical side of things. But yeah, like with the post launch, yeah, we did all this bug fixing, and then we introduced those hardcore dungeons, and then we also introduced this. We wanted to have something extra that, like, as an extra challenge, but also reward, and so we introduced this Electrum system, which I don't know if you've seen, Josh. Like, there's this new kind of temple near the Helos village when you first start. And so, yeah, like we were discussing what we could do there, and the kind of general idea was, it'd be cool to have some kind of open temple there, right? And as a level designer, I'm thinking, okay, how can I make this spicy? What can I do here? And so many times, man, like I know, how I said, like I had this day job, as well as working this, night job in game development. Like, it's funny though, because so many times, like during the day, I'd be thinking about and going through, okay, what can I do, later on, like with the game, and I had heaps of ideas come to me, like when I was at my other job, and one of them was about this particular location for this Electrum temple and stuff. And I thought, oh man, I could base it off the intro cinematic, like the old school intro cinematic for Titan Quest, with the Tal'Keen that fights the Spartan soldiers. And so I pitched that idea, and I actually drew up concept art for like the Zeus statue falling over onto the Medusa. And like the Medusa's like since been long dead, and it's like turned to bone and all that sort of stuff. And like you see the remnants of the statue, and you can actually go inside the temple, and that's where the Electrum kind of mechanics are that you can like activate. And what those do is they basically put cursors on your character, and so like it drastically reduces your resistances to the elements or certain things. And then, but from that, every enemy you kill while under these cursors accumulates Electrum, which you can then spend on these Electrum orbs to drop like loot. And you can kind of target loot from different acts. So if you're looking for a specific piece from Immortal Throne or from Eternal Embers or something, then you can do that. And so it's sort of that kind of risk versus reward. And I just thought it was so cool, like having all of that within this setting of this recognizable kind of temple. And then like I added a secret because I just love having secrets. But that was another thing I wanted to talk to you about as well, Josh, perhaps after. But yeah, this temple, yeah, that was really cool. Just adding that in there.
I guess as another question for you about kind of going from mod to expansion, in terms of like the overall length, again, when you're working by yourself versus working with a team, obviously resources and time and energy are going to be very different. When you got picked up and you worked on this as a full-blown expansion, did like the scope of the mod change at all, like when you got access to more resources like that, or do you try to keep
Yeah, definitely, man. Because I mean, and this sort of speaks to some of the controversy over it, because when it first came out, like I still had all of my modding stuff online, right, for people to see. And so of course the community, they started recognizing stuff. They saw the, my name, Unearthed
Hmm.
Studios or something, and so they were putting two and two together. And so because of that, a lot, there was, I wouldn't say a lot, but there were, there was a few people, and like some of them were prominent people that were kind of seeing it as like, oh, this is just THQ, like it's just a cash grab, like they've just taken a mod and like turned it into an expansion. Where
Hmm.
in actual fact, like I went through my entire mod and just like stripped it basically, and then
Hmm.
rebuilt the whole thing, because when you go from a mod to official expansion or professional development, it has to be brought up to a certain
Yep.
standard, right? And so, I was tasked with going through and basically, yeah, reworking everything to make sure that it was up to that professional standard. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, and I guess it's also a case of like, there's heaps of positive stuff said, but you know how you always focus on the negative stuff that people say, and so I specifically remember that people say, oh, it's just a mod, it's just a cash grab or whatever. Um, but then there were people that would say, hey, and kind of defend it and stuff. And then I was also thinking, oh, should I take down my modding kind of stuff? But then I decided, hey, I don't think so. Like, number one, I haven't been told from THQ to take any of it down. Like, otherwise they would have said something, right? And then
Yep.
number two, I mean, that's part of, like, I wouldn't be here without that, right? I wouldn't be here with that's kind of the legacy of the mod and where everything came from. And so, yeah, so I decided to leave that up. But yeah, yeah, I forgot my train of thought. Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, and again, like as you were saying at the start, there's always that very like weird position. I think like modders have like when they decide to either like sell, have like a paid mod, or if they go and do like something that's a more of a expansion or kind of like fully integrated into the game itself. Because again, like a lot of these mods, and I'm sure as you're definitely going to agree to, are done out of a labor of love for these
Yeah,
respective games. But it's always that like kind of weird give or take of, well, can I make something that I can, sell and maybe earn a few bucks or, try to, recoup some of the time spent on it. And there are some people who, vehemently oppose that. I know, like in like all mind-based communities, that it
yeah,
has to be about the, love of the game above all else. But
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure, like, and this could also be, I think, a good segue into this question. Like, in terms of, like, I guess, like, development culture, what was it like going from being, like, a solo mod, and you kind of, like, touched on this a few minutes ago, to working with a team, to having, like, a team of people trying to make a commercial product, as opposed to just, again, a mod, free mod for a game?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely challenges. Like, people have different ideas about what they direction they want to go in, and it might conflict with what you had in mind for your mod. But at the
Mhm.
same time, you have like way more resources at your hands.
Mhm.
You can like there's sort of it's great working solo, but at the same time, I always had this lack of being able to bounce ideas off people, and like,
Mhm.
hey, is this dungeon cool, or is this design, like, what do you think about this layout, or whatever, and I didn't really have that. And so working and collaborating with the team, it was just so good to, like, have meetings every day and just to talk about these things, and like, yeah, bounce around ideas and stuff. And then also, yeah, like I said, having way more resources at your hands. Like, there were so many limitations with the mod and with what I could do. Like, you know there's heaps of things that I wanted to do where I just couldn't because of the lack of the tools at hand or whatever it was. And so from there, yeah, it was really, like, overall it was really cool. And like at the same time, Josh, you know how there's like that sentiment in game dev of, if you're just starting out, you shouldn't, like, you should start small, and you should, don't think about your dream game. Like, you just start with something and then you work up to your dream game, that you want to make eventually, Whereas I feel like my story is like a little bit
Mm-hmm.
kind of pushes against that, because like, I mean, it was just surreal at the same time, man. Because you think about you working on a game, it's a labor of love, it's your passion.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time, modders work on games because they love the game, and then to have that be picked up by the publisher, and then like when I remember the night I was first told, you know, by THQ, like, yeah, we would like to make your mod into an expansion for Titan Quest. I was just like, I was just speechless. And I remember telling my wife like about it, and she was just like, she, I mean, she grasps the magnitude of it, but perhaps not in the way like of, because she doesn't really play games and that sort of thing. But she still knew. For me, she knew what it meant to me, and that it was just huge. And so that, yeah, like it was basically, I went from having a mod of the game that you love to become officially part of the game, and then work with, like, collaborate with another team on it. It was just like, it's just amazing, man. Yeah. Even now, yeah, like it's still pretty crazy.
All right. I think with that, I am about out of questions about Eternal Embers. Anything else you want to discuss, or we kind of move on to like the final part of our cast?
Yeah, maybe just one more thing
Mm-hmm.
about specifically about the dungeons. There was another challenge, I guess, when it came to the dungeons, because and it goes back to player expectations, right? Because a lot of the dungeons in Titan Quest, they're relatively small, and so I wanted to expand that. And so I think, in some ways, yeah, that was positive, because you have a lot more kind of dungeon crawling, you have a lot more to explore, right? Um, but then in addition to that, I added in these secrets into dungeons, right? And because, like, leading up to that, like previously in any cave or whatever, there's not really any secrets to find.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and especially being in ancient Egypt, I thought, oh, this is just, this is such a good opportunity to add these really cool secrets into the walls and stuff. But the problem came where, and this was another, yeah, learning experience and just like an oversight on my part, is that, I think when you introduce something new, like a new mechanic or whatever, you need to tell the player that, hey, there's this new thing here,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of stage it in a way so that they can, moving forward from there, they know, okay, there's this new thing, I need to keep an eye out for it.
Mm-hmm.
And with the very first dungeon you go into, where I had the first secret, it was also connected with a side quest, and which just like it made it even worse, basically, because people are trying to find the side quest, they don't know about the secret wall mechanics, and so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and it hadn't been introduced or hinted at to the player. And so I had all these secrets everywhere, but especially the first one, yeah, that was something that I really, like, kind of was like, oh yeah, I really need to learn from this in the future, that for things like this, we need to, really introduce it to the player.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, especially for like a long-running franchise or a long-developed game, they need to do something new that hasn't been seen before. It needs to be properly onboarded, or you run into that problem there. And yeah, like that is that is definitely a UI UX discussion for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, because actually one of the guys from THQ, like, because they would sort of every now and again review the current build of the expansion and the progress. And when they came across that, they suggested, okay, you need to add like a UI marker to the secret areas, so that players can just look at the map like, and see that, okay, there's a secret wall there, like there's an entrance there that you can go through. And but in my mind at the time, I was just like, I was, as soon as I heard that, I was like, what? Like, why? It's a secret. Why would you want to add like a big sign saying, hey, there's a secret here? Like doesn't that just, completely diminish the whole idea of it being a secret? And so I suggested a compromise. I said, okay, can we make these markers like have a proximity radius, so that when you start approaching the wall or whatever, then the marker will show up once you're close enough on the map. And so that's what they implemented. They agreed to do that. But then once again, yeah, in hindsight, I'm like, okay, I can totally see why. Maybe not for all the secrets that we should do that, but like especially for that first one, it should have been just like really obvious.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things I see this a lot in like adventure or puzzle heavy games where if you don't give the player like the basic like the breadcrumbs to understand what something
Yeah.
is, they're not going to pick that up, and then when it becomes a required element, they're going to have no idea that even existed in the game, and it can be very frustrating. I know for a lot of people when they run into those problems where how was I supposed to know I was supposed to click on this random stone that then opens up the door and that was the required path to get through this section?
Yeah, man. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I think a lot of it was just learning how production was, and learning to kind of I guess just accept feedback from people more openly, and just think about a bit outside my own box of what the bigger reasons of why they're suggesting these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just comes with experience. Yeah, and like I think later on, like I designed like the last dungeon I ever designed for the game was I created only one of the hardcore dungeons, which was in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, man, like that one there, I'm really proud of that one. Like that kind of, I think it brought together all of my experience at the end of the project, and I think I really nailed that in terms of the design and also the theme of it. Like, because it's a hardcore one, I want it to be really tough, and so I was playing with things like, in terms of level design, like the camera angle, like how you have the isometric view. The player goes in, and then they reach this certain point where there's like this gauntlet or there's this corridor, but I positioned it so that's like the character, because when you're always running to the south side of the screen in isometric games, like you can,
Yeah.
that's the worst angle and you can't see much. So I specifically designed the corridor so you're running that way for a start. Then I lined each wall with these dart traps, which and I tuned them so they're particularly lethal, and I had different elements, like they do pierce damage, one does poison, there's others that shoot out like elemental, like fireballs or electricity or whatever. So I lined the walls with that, and then also I sprinkled a couple of enemies through the corridor so that the player, to kind of bait them in there, right? But once they get in there, the traps will activate, and then not only that, I had ambush enemies on the ground which you can't see, and so once you enter in there, like the ambush enemies like start spawning as well. And then so like I just say that to kind of illustrate all of my kind of what I had learnt with designing dungeons and designing play space to especially challenge the player, like not only just using the layouts but also the camera itself and stuff like that.
All right. I
You
think
have to play through it, Josh. Do a run, man.
and I'll still fall for the trap even after you explain it here.
Dude, it was so entertaining watching people go through it for the first time. Like, probably, if you don't mind, like, just a quick shout out to Mr. Fay and Kerplunk Gaming. Like, just watching those guys, like they're two of the main streamers for Titan Quest, and when they go through it, like it's pretty entertaining, especially their first time.
All right. I think with that, I do want to touch on kind of like what your next project is. So this will be kind of like official last call for any questions from chat. So maybe another 10-15 minutes if that works for you.
Yeah, sounds good.
And again, for chat, if you have any more questions for Charles, please get them in the next few minutes. So with the expansion, that was released, let me get the date here, that came out in 2021. And since you've worked on that, you've started Unearthed Studios. So, what have you been up to? Like, what's like your current game dev project?
Yeah, so I started the studio because um, like throughout the development and part of the kind of negotiations and stuff, like I wanted to like have my name or I want to associate like the mod with something that was visible and was professional, right? And
Mhm.
so I thought, okay, I need to legitimize this and start a studio, and so that's started Unearthed. Um, but then since then I can't really I can't really speak about what I'm working on now. But what I can say is, I had to like between the end of of Eternal Embers and now, like I've had to learn a new engine,
Mhm.
and and I've actually joined Grimlaw Games, and I'm working on Project Minerva at the moment as the lead level designer. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and I guess all I can say is you have to wait and see what happens with that, man. But it's very very exciting. Yeah.
I guess as like another question, like for like students or other like first timers watching us, any major, I guess like takeaways or any tips you can give, like someone watching this in terms of going from modder to working at a game studio to now kind of starting your own game studio. Like anything you can like help them out with in terms of like
Yeah,
kind of like moving between these different like kind of like phases of being in the industry.
yeah, definitely, man. I think like first of all, like you just start creating something, right? Start building something, like make a level, get familiar with the basics, that sort of thing. And it helps you to get familiar with the fundamentals. And I'm talking just in terms of level design, like, but then it makes sense for all other kind of disciplines within game development, right? Like for level
Mm-hmm.
design, you want to learn the fundamentals of things like the scale of assets compared to the player, good composition, elevation, player space and progression, stuff like that. Um, Things like avoiding repetition in your levels. Like you don't want to basically you want the player to go through the level and not see the hand of the developer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the classic thing is if you see like a rock that's just been dropped and placed right next to each other, and you just see it's just repeated, right? So that's like a telltale thing of like a beginner at the craft. But yeah, like the biggest thing, like especially for me, was just putting your stuff out there, whether it's among the community or you make your own website or something, um, and then just like learning the asset libraries, learning different like ways to recycle things and make different stuff. Um, think about like how to tell a story as well at the same time. Like you want to start like adding in some story elements and that sort of thing. And just as you progress, just keep sharing your development. Share your project with others and get feedback from them. And there's just loads of online resources as well. Like I remember like during my day job, I would just constantly be listening to podcasts, listening to GDC talks and stuff, because they have a lot of, talks on there about how to get into the industry, right? And man, so many of the people that I've met and worked with, like in the industry, so many of them have come from modding backgrounds. Like it's
Yeah.
huge. Like, I'm really surprised just how many, because you might think in your head, oh, you have to go to, these guys have all been to like game development school, or they've learned and they've got all these degrees in game development or whatever it is. But man, so many of them have just come from modding backgrounds, whether it's
Yeah.
Skyrim or whatever. So that's huge.
Oh yeah, for sure. And again, it's one of the kind of really nice things about game development is that I mean I've spoken to a lot of like first time developers, people who've gone from like student or hobbyist making their first game, and a lot of them come from vastly different jobs. Like they didn't go to school to go into game dev. I've spoken to people who were investment bankers, who
Yeah,
teachers, anything like this. And they got into it by being self-taught, watching
Yeah.
videos, doing mods and stuff like that. And in a lot of cases, having that hands-on experience, I find, seems to be, at least from a game design standpoint, oftentimes more important than just going to and getting, a 4 or 6 year degree. Because for a lot of the people who only view this as very exact numbers, so they view strictly from a programming standpoint, they're not going to understand some of the finer aspects of the actual game design. You mentioned a minute
Yeah.
ago, even just the act of placing rocks or shrubbery around an area. I cannot count how many 2D platformers or just 2D games I play where they will recycle the same placement of the asset in the background. So it's rock, tree, shrub, rock, tree, shrub, and that is the entire background for a 5 to 10 minute long level. And
Yeah, and especially it kind of becomes a curse, man, because once you can't unsee these things once you have an eye for it.
yes,
I remember I was watching my sister play this AAA game, and she came across this coastal scene, and there was pirate ships in the water, and literally they had dropped a pirate ship in the water and then dropped another one right next to it, and they were the exact same orientation, the exact same ship, and they were right next to each other. And it was just so obvious. But
mm-hmm.
she actually didn't pick it until I pointed out. I was like, "Oh, look at those ships! What the heck is going
It
on
is the
there?"
curse of studying game design. Once you start
Yeah.
looking at this stuff, it never goes away.
But dude, I when you to your point about all walks of life and stuff. I remember even in teachers college, at university, I was in the lectures, and I had my book out, and I was actually just doodling, I was drawing dungeon layouts in in my teaching books and stuff, because at the time, it was still my hobby just to make this mod, right? But
Mm-hmm.
even then, I think there's really is something to be said about perseverance and just yeah, because it's not easy, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I keep saying, I was working 2 jobs at the time, and that was right throughout the whole development of Eternal Embers. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd start at work, my day job, 7:30 till 5, and then come home and then work right through the evening till 1 or 2 in the morning, and then do it all over again the next day. And a lot of people can't do that, but if you really want to do it, and make it your career, then yeah, you just have to kind of push through those hard times. And then that's sort of course once I was in the industry, but even back in when you're just modding by yourself, there's so many times where you sit down at the computer and just you're not interested, you don't feel like working on the mod, because
Mm-hmm.
you just you don't have that same drive or whatever it is. And so a lot of the times, I've seen it a lot where mods just get abandoned, or they're
Yeah.
half finished or something. And you hear in the industry a lot of the time, these guys, I think David Brevik, he does a lot of talking on this, about how it's important to finish something,
Yeah.
and usually the 95% to 100%, that little 5% window right at the end, is where people a lot of the times fall off, because that last
Mm-hmm.
percent, man, it's actually, yeah, there's a heck of a lot of work that goes into that last little bit to finally get something finished. um, and that might seem daunting,
Mm-hmm.
and in my case, I didn't actually finish my mod, right? It wasn't a finished product, but then there were parts. It didn't matter though, because you have to think in terms of finishing particular parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Publishers might see that you haven't finished the mod, but you've finished that, you've got some levels or some work out there, and that scene is finished. You've polished that one scene, and then they can say, okay, this guy knows. He knows his craft. He knows how to create a scene, a vista. He knows composition. He knows
Mm-hmm.
these fundamentals of design. He hasn't finished the mod, but for our we need level designers, or we need whoever to join our team, and this guy, he can do it. So I think, yeah, stuff like that, you just really need to think about and stick with it.
Yeah. And it is, as you said, having something that you can say you finished is a very important aspect of growing your portfolio. And it's also how you start kind of understanding the entire pipeline when it comes to game dev. Because again, there are a lot of people who they never get past that initial, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I did X stage of game development? They never kind of see what does it actually mean to actually implement this into a title. And unfortunately, something that I've seen from a lot of indie developers and kind of like first timers, where it's a cool idea, but it doesn't go anywhere. Like it just kind of just fizzles out. And part of making a solid game is you have to go from beginning to middle to end. And it
Yeah.
again, like it is infinitely a lot harder as I just put into words right there.
Yeah, man, it's a lot of work. Yeah, you definitely, you have to have a passion for what you're doing, but also kind of have a vision. Like I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had just with the mod, like I was like, oh man, this is going to be so cool. Like just to release it to the community and get their feedback. I've got a website for it. I wanted to kind of just build it up within the community, right? So even just that goal itself, like that was pushing me as well as just the passion of and interest in making the mod and like for the game itself.
Mm-hmm. I think with that, we have two questions from people in chat, and then we'll kind of do like our final wrap up for the cast for tonight. So, Beaky asked this earlier. Is the dream to make this your new full time job? Also, after being a part of a team and seeing how it works, would you like to create your own game as part of your own company to hire others into?
I mean, so the first part of that question, the dream to make this my full time job. Yes, 100%. Um, yeah, like this journey, it's been a long journey, but I think now, um, at least for Unearthed Studios, like that's kind of on hold because I'm now I've joined Grimlaw Games. Um, but I think in the future, yeah, to answer the second part of your question, like would I like to create my own game and hire others? Like I think I would in the future. But currently I just feel like I've been in the industry professionally like for about 3 years now, and I've been through one full production cycle, and I'm going through another one now, and I just feel like, yeah, before I even get to that point, man, like I've got a lot to learn. Like I'm sure Josh can relate to that. Like you've interviewed so many people and just heard their kind of backgrounds and stories, and to reach the level where you're comfortable with like hiring employees and getting programmers and art team together and to create a new IP all of your own, like it's just a huge task. So yeah, definitely down in the future I would like to, but currently, yeah, I think I still would like to learn a lot more and get some more experience under my belt.
All right. And then the other question from Kitas said, you mentioned how you're now a lead level game designer. Is there a position or a game dream that you would like to see yourself achieve now, knowing you can make it possible?
A position or a dream game that you would like to achieve? Um, I mean, honestly, like now, I mean, now being, yeah, I feel like now I've achieved, I'm a level lead, I've become a lead level designer. And so, I mean, what's kind of beyond that? I mean, I guess, yeah, like going back to Unearthed Studios and running that and kind of being the design head of a new game would be maybe the next step. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess my point is that I'm quite happy at this stage, and this is basically my dream position currently that I'm in, and I feel very very privileged and lucky to be here. And I expect to be in this position for a long time before I start thinking about where I can progress in my career from here. But in terms of a dream game, I mean, this is basically like Titan Quest, Eternal Embers. Working on Titan Quest has been my dream game so far. So we'll see what happens beyond that.
All right, sounds good. So with that, I guess any final points, any final tips, or anything you would like to say to take us out on before we wrap up for this evening?
Um, I just wanted to say, I guess thank you to all the community for Titan Quest, like just everyone keeping it alive, especially the streamers. I mean, the game is just it's since 2006, like it's still going strong. Um, Also, a big thanks to THQ. Just, I mean, just for taking a chance on a little modder from New Zealand. Like, yeah, it's pretty crazy. But yeah, like they've kind of given me this whole new career and opened everything up for me. So I just really appreciate that. Um, and then yeah, just the teams I've worked with, like once again, Digital Arrow, and then this new company I'm with, like everyone's really cool. And well, especially yeah, of course with Eternal Embers, it was really great and just great bunch of guys to work with. And then yeah, like Josh, I've been wanting to catch up with you for ages, man. And I think I reached out to you not long after the Eternal Embers released, and so and then like in between that period and now, man, like I say, yeah, I had to learn a new engine. There's been a lot of other stuff going on, but I always wanted to come back and just have this talk with you. So I really appreciate yeah, just the opportunity, man. It's great.
All right. And again, thank you so much for reaching out way back then, and it's great to have you on. And yeah, if you are free in the future, whether talking more about Project Minerva or any other projects you're working on, let me know. I'll be glad to have you back.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, I'll reach out to you. Yeah.
So I guess as one final question for me, I gotta ask, since you went from doing a Titan Quest mod to working on a ARPG expansion, now working on another ARPG, do you see yourself doing any? Are there any other genres you would like to try and like reach out to, or do you see yourself kind of focusing on ARPG design?
Oh man, I honestly, yeah, I don't, not really. Like, I love the genre. I love the isometric view in terms of level design. Yeah, all the aspects that make up action RPGs, I love. So I would love to continue working on them in the future. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it's sort of one of those things where I won't know fully the answer to that question until I start working on a game. Like, if I started working on a Skyrim like type game, or like a first person game, or over the top, over the shoulder RPG, like I might actually really love doing that. I feel like it'd be a lot more work because isometric, you have that camera angle and you see sort of from the bird's eye view
Mm-hmm.
down, more or less. Whereas like one of those first person games, like you have to worry about like everywhere 360-degree, like full
Mm-hmm.
view, and you have to design everything for that. But then in saying that, I'm sure it'll be really rewarding to do that as well. Um, but yeah, man, like probably yeah. Just to answer your question, like more directly, like I love action RPGs, and yeah, these this genre especially is just like people stick with these games for years, and like you can just add so much content to them. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I love working with action RPGs, and I'd like to continue to do so. Yeah.
All right. So, I think with that, we'll wrap things up for tonight. For yourself, in terms of social media, sites, links, whatever, if you have anything you'd like to mention, definitely feel free.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a Twitter, which is Unearthed Studios NZ. I don't actually use it that much, but I'm on there. I'm on Facebook, Unearthed Studios NZ. Um, yeah, and then I also have a website. If you just search Unearthed Studios, that should come up as well if you want to get in touch with me. And yeah, like I don't know, keep an eye out for what's next from us. And yeah, just thanks again, Josh, for the opportunity, man.
All right, not a problem. Yep, and I'm always looking for another ARPG to play, as I was not that into Diablo 4, and we started talking about issues with Diablo 4. We'll be here for another 3-4 hours.
Yeah, I did have that noted down if you wanted to talk about it, but I was like, yeah, that's kind of another long tangent rabbit hole that we can go down.
Maybe for next time, maybe we can have you on for an ARPG chat.
Yeah, man, sounds great.
uh, all right, so for everyone watching this live right now, we're going to end things here. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've been enjoying things recorded, you'll find links to Charles' stuff down below. For myself, do all the YouTubing algorithm stuff people tell you to do. I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, and who knows where the social media shakeup is going to end by the end of this year. We have our Discord and Patreon as well, so be sure to check those out. And as a special note, for people watching this live, if you're into game development and would like to take part in the Game Wisdom Game Jam, that is going to be starting on August 14th. There are signups available now. You'll find a link to that on the Game Wisdom Discord and a video here. So be sure to check that out. And as one final point, again, if you are a developer working on a game or just want to talk about some aspect of game dev with me, I'm always looking for guests for these shows. So reach out to me however which way you can find me. So again, Charles, thank you so much for coming on. We are in the time zone weirdness. Again, I'm in United States, you're in New Zealand. So what time is it for you right now?
It's almost 12 o'clock midday, man.
Yeah, and that is on Tuesday, right? It's Tuesday your time?
Yeah, on Tuesday, in the future.
Yes. So I am going to go probably grab some dinner. You'll probably, I guess, maybe have a late breakfast or early lunch time now.
Pretty much, man.
So I will let you go. And like I said, again, if you are free to come on and chat in the future, definitely reach out to me and we can set something up.
Yeah, man, I'd love to. Yeah, especially with the new project I'm working on. So for sure.
All right. So for everyone watching, once again, thank you for tuning in and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Have a great rest of your evening and talk to everybody next time.